Well, hello, TUC family. It's good to be with you, even if it's virtual. Of course, this is our new normal in so many ways. And those of us who have been navigating this pandemic, particularly around church, know all too well the power of connection that can come through these kinds of technologies. First, let me just say thank you to all of you who organized this amazing event. It is no surprise to me that it's taken on such a life and become so creative, because I always knew that there was such creative force and power and energy untapped at TUC. And so it's good to see what can happen when the energy has a place to go. I want to particularly thank Pastor Steve for his hospitality in inviting me to participate in these events. I also want to thank Peter Matthews, a good friend, as the outgoing president, and Catherine Sasanuma as your incoming president. I count you both as my friends. And also my thanks goes to Pastor Hector. It's good to know that you replace your Latino associate pastor with another Latino associate pastor. I am currently living in New Zealand. Before I came to you in 2017, I was living in the South Island of New Zealand, a very rugged and rural university city, a small city. And my move from that city of 120,000 people to Tokyo was quite the shock. Coming back from Tokyo, it was clear that we could not manage living in a city that small. And so we managed to receive a call in the largest city in New Zealand, Auckland, New Zealand, which is a city of 1.6 million people, but feels much like a suburb by Tokyo standards. I want to update you on our children, because you'll no doubt remember some of them. Our oldest, Ezra, who I believe was 7 when he came to Tokyo, is on the verge of becoming a teenager. He'll be 13 next month. Actually in a month and a half or so. And I think he is really trying to exploit all of the teenager attitude and vibes you possibly can. He's a wonderful boy, loves church. He goes to a Christian school here in Auckland, and he is known for leading prayers in class and things like that, which makes me very proud. He's also a keen sports person. He loves basketball, and he imagines himself to be a professional basketball player when he gets older, and his parents are very much praying for that, because that will make our retirement decisions so much easier. My second son, Elias, is 9 years old. He is a very interesting character. He's very funny. He's developed quite a sense of humor. He is into art, and particularly culinary things. He loves to bake and to cook and create dishes, and he's actually quite good at it, which is great for us. He's also taken up drumming as a passion, and so he likes to bang on whatever he can, which is also cool. Now, you'll recall that when we moved to Tokyo, my wife Amanda was 4.5 months pregnant or so with our little girl. We didn't know it was a little girl at that time. And she's now on the verge of turning 5 next week, in a week and a half's time, and she will be going to school. She'll be finishing up daycare and kindergarten, and will be headed to her first year in big school, as she calls it. And she's a lovely little girl. She's sweet and precocious and funny. She's very funny and asks all kinds of really good questions. As I reflect on Tokyo Union Church and our time there, I tried to map out some of the things that I wanted to mention, and I think I filled up 2 pages. And so I really don't know where to begin or where to end. Our time there was so wonderful. So many memories of the friends and congregants at TUC, and many of the colleagues that Amanda made at St. Mary's International School as she taught there for almost 2 years. Particularly, I remember working with Pastor Johan, which was a great joy of mine. And Johan and Henny, of course, were so kind and hospitable and caring to our family. And they made sure that TUC always wrapped their arms around us and helped us in every way that they could. And we really remember that fondly and really appreciate, and I appreciate the strong relationship that Johan and I had while in Tokyo. It's interesting as I think about, my commute to church was around 45 minutes door to door living in Setagaya. And I now live right next door to the church. And so my commute is 30 seconds. This is my official office, my study, and I have an unofficial office in the manse. And so I bounce between these two places, and it's a definite change from my time in Tokyo. One of the particularly funny stories I like to tell about Tokyo is learning the difference between catching a local train and an express train. And I remember telling the story early in my time in Tokyo of trying to get from Omotesando to Yoga Station on the Denentoshi line and taking an express train 3 times each way and missing it. But as I arrived at Futako Tamagawa Station and decided to just take a local train to Yoga one stop, I remember looking up and seeing the clearest, beautiful sunset view of Fujisan, which is still something that I very much remember. In terms of the church, how could I not talk about the many voluntary activities and the many leaders, the way that almost everybody who came into TUC had to come to understand the culture of TUC was one of service. And so still to this day, I think TUC is so special because more than 60, 70% of the people in that church would be volunteering and lending a hand to multiple ministries, making that church work, making that community go. And I remember that so fondly. I remember the music ministry of the church, the sanctuary choir and UPT, Yuka-san and Lorraine and the worship and music committee that met ever so often. And the staff, working with the staff, of course, was a great joy. I don't think I could have existed for the time that I was in Tokyo without Megumi-san's help. She was literally like my other brain. And she was the person that helped me get all the things done that I needed to get done. And I think even for 6 months after I came to New Zealand from Tokyo, I was still emailing and ringing Megumi, trying to sort things out and making sure that everything was tidied up in Tokyo. But Rose, Higuchi-san, Chris, Daiki-san, Carmen, Katz, Colleen with the youth, these were, of course, amazing moments, and I really enjoyed them. One of my highlights at TUC was mentoring Princeton Seminary interns, and we had 4 in the 3 years that I was there. Our first was Jade, and then, of course, we had Audrey, who is still with you, and then Melissa and Caroline in that final summer. And those were such amazing experiences because they got to stretch their skills in some ways and learn and be dropped into a different culture, but then they also were able to give back so much of their own gifts and skills to us as a church. And of course, helping us coordinate the Vacation Bible School was a huge, huge endeavor, and we were very helped by them. The youth trips, of course, stand out to me. Those were some of the most memorable trips. I echo Pastor Matt Harden and the ski trips. Now, he actually was brave enough to go skiing. I don't ski. I'm a Miami boy. I'll get in the water, but I'm not getting in the snow. And so, but watching the kids ski and having those times in the evenings to talk and to build fellowship was amazing. And of course, then our Kumamoto trips down to Kyushu to help rebuild places after the earthquake were really, really powerful for me. And some of the conversations that we had there were so special. And I still remember the way that leaders emerged from those trips, the way Sasha and Christopher Sasanuma, stepped up to become our translators and our cultural guides, my cultural guide. I'll never forget that. And I think that drew us ever so close. I was there, of course, for the basement fellowship renovation. Everyone has talked about that. And Johan and I were there when that happened. And I have to say, that again was a miracle in the making, just watching that come to pass. The way that the church rallied around the financial support for getting that project to the line, the way that the leaders on that team were able to take the church on a journey through all of the decisions and how much collaboration and discernment went into things like the floors and the wall colors and the sliding panels and how much sound led through them. It, of course, came in very handy when we started once again hosting things like Sermon Lab, which I so thoroughly enjoyed that now at my new church, I host an online sermon lab each week, which has participants from all over the country that dial in and we talk about the week's readings. And so that's something that I've been able to pinch from TUC. Of course, part of what was so important to me was the relationship between work and faith. And TUC was really instrumental in that, because at TUC, I realized that so many of the people who were coming in our doors, who were moving into Tokyo, who were looking for a church, were only in Japan because their work had brought them there. And yet many of them had never interacted with the church in a way that spoke into their working lives or any sense of calling or vocation. And so I remember in my last year when I hosted a Wednesday night Bible study called Taking Your Soul to Work, and I thought there'd be 5 or 6 participants. And on the first night, we had so many that we had to move into the full fellowship hall. I think there was something like 30 or 35 people that came. After that, it settled into a group of about 10 to 15. And hearing people's stories of their working life, of their calling, their sense of how God was involved in what they do and what they feel skilled at, was so, so special. And that, of course, led us into the space of the Fuji Fellows, which was an attempt to get an old church, 150 years, that does so many good things into a space of innovation, of doing something risky and new. And of course, that happened, and then the pandemic happened. But in leading up to that, it galvanized such an energy in parts of the church, and it couldn't have been done without the Roberts and the Bratchers, and so many more people. And of course, the fellows themselves, Franz and Kingsford and Maria and Mugumi Grace. And so one of the good things out of all of that is that somehow Jonathan O landed in our laps, just in the middle of that, from a guest preaching slot into asking him if he'd be interested in helping with YAG, to becoming the program director of Fuji Fellows. And now, of course, we know that God was simply opening the door and preparing both TUC and Jonathan for connecting all of his gifts and his work with the ministry of the church, and how happy we are that that happened. Of course, I was always very encouraged by TUC's dedication to the poor, to the homeless, to those on the margins. I was always so encouraged by things like ARI Sundays, that the church would hand over the worship service to people from around the world to listen to their wisdom, to listen to the way that God was working indeed through their own sense of call, their own sense of vocation, their own sense of preparation at ARI. I also think that the Moan Project, the Rice Project, and the monthly Moan lunches were an amazing witness to what it means to be a church dedicated to those on the margins, that Matthew 25 principle. And to see all of those men and some women lining up on those Saturdays for that free lunch and those 2 servings that we would have. And then to know that on any given Saturday, that there'd be other lines, other people queuing on Omotesando, that they'd be queuing for the newest Louis Vuitton bag or the new Nike sneakers. And there's so many times that I would come into the church and ask Megumi, what are those people out there queuing for? She'd go to lunch and come back and say, they're waiting for sneakers. They're waiting for the newest t-shirt to be released. And how wonderful, what a witness that on that space and on that boulevard of Omotesando, we as a church had people queuing up as well, but they were queuing up for bread from heaven. They were queuing up for the gifts of our church that come from God and that were dedicated to them on behalf of our God. And so that was always something that I thought was so, so special. Now, you've asked me to think about prayer with you and to talk about how I pray and what prayer might look like. And that's a big subject. And so you'll forgive me if my thoughts are kind of all over the place. But one thing that's clear to me is that the more you pray, the more prayer changes. And so when you ask me what I think prayer to me is simply participation in the divine life. It's participation in God. It's one of the only ways that we can be close to God this side of heaven. How do I pray? Well, I pray by speaking, as many of you probably do. We ask God, we close our eyes, and we ask God for all the things that are in our hearts and on our minds and weigh heavily upon us. We plead with God to change our world and to change our circumstances, or the circumstances of those we love, or those who break our hearts. We also pray by doing. I pray by doing, by serving, I think is a prayer. By laughing and communing and eating with people, I think is a prayerful activity. But I think more and more nowadays, prayer for me is about listening. It's about silence and stillness. I read in one place that God's first language, God's mother tongue, God's heart language is silence. And so if you really want to talk the language of God, you need to learn how to get still and how to be silent. I noticed for me that if I pray for 30 minutes, I have to spend 29 minutes getting still. But it's worth it, because what I'm all about in prayer is trying to get myself into a place where I can listen to God. So the stillness and the silence are the important thing. The other thing is not seeing prayer as a means to an end. So often we treat God as a cosmic waiter. We give him a list of things that we want God to do for us, when in fact prayer has been given to us not to transform God's mind, not to make God move, but to transform our hearts and our own minds and to make us move. And so I think of prayer nowadays not so much as a tool, a piece of technology that I get to use on God, but as a gift that God has given me. When times are hard, when times are tough in my life or in the world with the Ukraine war, I can pray. And not many people in the world can do that. And so I feel really blessed and really special and really loved that God has gifted me and given me something to do when I can't do anything to change the circumstances that are before me. I want to conclude with this prayer that I found, and it's, I think, a good prayer for all of us. And so if you can come back to this, I keep this prayer in the notes app of my phone, and perhaps you can do the same. This is how this prayer goes. Pray with me. O Holy One, I hear and say so many words, yet yours are the words that I need. Speak now and help me listen. And if what I hear is silence, then let it quiet me, let it disturb me, let it touch my need, let it break my pride, let it shrink my certainties, and let it enlarge my wonder. I'm praying for UTUC. I'm praying for another 150 years, and I'm praying for that time when we can see each other again. God bless you, and we'll see each other soon.